history of blowing things up. Let's be honest for a second, because if you are watching this, you probably have a bit of a morbid streak. We humans are remarkably good at building things, sure, but we are statistically much better at making things go boom. It is arguably our most consistent hobby. But here is the kicker: the most devastating, world-altering explosions in history didn't usually start with a villainous laugh or a genius plan for world domination. Most of the time, they started with someone mixing the wrong ingredients, leaving a stove on, or quite literally poking a sleeping bear with a very short stick. We like to think of history as a series of calculated moves on a grand chessboard, but when it comes to the history of bombs, it is more like a comedy of errors where the punchline can level a city block. From the ancient Chinese alchemists who just wanted to live forever to the Cold War scientists who weren't entirely sure if they were about to set the atmosphere on fire, the story of the bomb is the story of the ultimate. Oops. The elixir of death? Our story begins in the 9th century, during the Tang dynasty in China. Now, imagine you are a Taoist alchemist. You aren't trying to destroy the world, quite the opposite. You are looking for the elixir of immortality. You want to live forever, drink tea, and maybe write some poetry. You're mixing honey, sulfur, and saltpeter because, in your head, that sounds like a recipe for eternal life. You lean in close, perhaps adjusting your robes, and then, bang! You've just burned your beard off and possibly the entire laboratory. This was the birth of gunpowder, or fire medicine as they called it. It is perhaps the greatest irony in human history that the search for eternal life resulted in the single most effective way to end it. For a few centuries, the Chinese used this new toy for fireworks and fire arrows, which were essentially just angry bottle rockets. But once the formula traveled west via the Silk Road, the oops factor went global. European monarchs realized that instead of building thicker walls, they could just pack this black dust into a metal tube and erase the concept of a castle entirely. The invention of the bomb wasn't an act of malice. It was a massive culinary failure that changed the trajectory of human warfare forever. The Nobel regret. Fast forward a few hundred years to the 19th century, where things get significantly more unstable. Enter Alfred Nobel. Most people know him as the guy behind the Peace Prize, but before he was handing out gold medals to diplomats, he was the merchant of death. Nobel was obsessed with nitroglycerin, a liquid so volatile that if you dropped a beaker of it, you wouldn't just be fired, you would be liquidated. After several oops moments, including one that unfortunately claimed the life of his own brother, Nobel realized that liquid explosives were a PR nightmare. He discovered that if you mixed nitroglycerin with a type of sedimentary earth called diatomaceous earth, it became a stable paste you could actually handle without evaporating. He called it dynamite. He genuinely thought that by creating something so destructive, humanity would finally be too scared to fight. He believed he had invented a deterrent for war. He was, quite spectacularly, wrong. Dynamite didn't stop wars, it just made them much louder and more efficient. When Nobel read his own premature obituary in a French newspaper that called him the man who found ways to kill more people faster than ever before, he had a midlife crisis of global proportions and funded the Nobel Prizes to fix his legacy. It turns out, the oops wasn't the invention itself, but the naive belief that humans wouldn't use a new toy to hit each other. The demon core and the tickling problem. As we move into the 20th century, the stakes go from leveling a building to deleting a zip code. We reach the Manhattan Project, the peak of scientific achievement and also the peak of what happens if I touch this. One of the most terrifying oops moments in the history of the bomb involves something called the demon core. This was a 6.2 kilogram subcritical mass of plutonium. After the war ended, scientists at Los Alamos were still playing with it to see how close they could get to a chain reaction without, dying. In 1946, a physicist named Louis Slotin was doing a procedure called tickling the dragon's tail. He was using a flathead screwdriver, yes, a literal hardware store screwdriver, to keep two halves of a beryllium shield apart over the plutonium core. If the halves touched, the core would go critical. His hand slipped. The screwdriver fell out. For a fraction of a second, the room filled with a bright blue glow of ionized air. Slotin felt a sour taste in his mouth and a burning sensation on his skin. He had just accidentally turned himself into a living ghost. He jerked his hand back and saved his colleagues, but he was dead 9 days later. This wasn't a battlefield error. It was a dropped my keys error that happened to involve the most dangerous substance on the planet. It serves as a haunting reminder that even the most brilliant minds are just one shaky hand away from a catastrophe. The Tsar Bomba and the missing math. By the 1960s, the United States and the Soviet Union were in a literal measuring contest to see who could make the biggest boom. The Soviets won this particular contest with the Tsar Bomba. The original plan was to make a 100-megaton bomb, but the scientists realized that if they actually did that, the fallout would basically poison the entire Soviet Union. So they scaled it down to 50 megatons. Just for context, that is about 3,300 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. When they dropped it over the Novaya Zemlya archipelago, the resulting mushroom cloud was 40 miles high. It was so big that the shockwave traveled around the entire Earth 3 times. But here is the oops for the pilots. They were told they had a 50% chance of surviving the blast. The plane was painted white to reflect the heat, but the heat was so intense it literally scorched the paint off. The shockwave caused the massive Tu-95 bomber to drop 3,300 feet in altitude instantly. The scientists had actually underestimated how the atmosphere would react to that much energy. They built something so big it was practically useless as a weapon because you couldn't use it without potentially ending the world or, at the very least, destroying your own delivery system. It was the ultimate over-engineered mistake. Broken arrows and the near misses. You might think that after the Cold War, we got better at handling these things. Well, welcome to the era of the broken arrow. This is the official military term for an accident involving a nuclear weapon that does not create a risk of war. There have been dozens of them. In 1961, a B-52 bomber carrying 2 Mark 39 nuclear bombs broke up mid-air over Goldsboro, North Carolina. One of the bombs fell into a field. When the military recovered it, they found that 5 of the 6 safety triggers had failed. A single, simple, low-voltage switch was the only thing that prevented a 4-megaton explosion in North Carolina. If that one switch had flipped, the entire eastern seaboard would look very different today. Then there was the 1980 Damascus, Arkansas incident, where a technician dropped a 3-pound socket wrench down a missile silo. It fell 80 feet, bounced, and pierced the skin of a Titan II missile, causing a fuel leak that eventually blew the 740-ton silo door 600 feet into the air and launched the nuclear warhead into a nearby ditch. Luckily, it didn't detonate. We are essentially living in a world where the only thing standing between us and total annihilation is the fact that sometimes the oops works in our favor. The space age. Oops. Even when we try to take the bombs off the planet, we find ways to mess it up. During the Starfish Prime test in 1962, the US detonated a nuclear warhead in outer space just to see what would happen. The answer? An electromagnetic pulse that knocked out streetlights and telephone lines in Hawaii, almost 1,000 miles away. Scientists were genuinely surprised by the scale of the effect. We essentially threw a rock at the sky and accidentally broke our own windows. It was a cosmic-scale oops that proved even when we leave the atmosphere, our penchant for unintended consequences follows us into the stars. This era of high-altitude testing showed that we were playing with forces we didn't fully grasp, treating the ionosphere like a laboratory for a science fair project gone horribly wrong. The legacy of the boom. The history of the bomb isn't just a timeline of technology. It's a testament to human fallibility. We are a species that discovered the secrets of the universe and immediately used them to build bigger and scarier ways to blow ourselves up, often by accident. From the alchemist looking for a fountain of youth to the technician dropping a wrench in a hole, our greatest leaps in destructive power have been paved with, "I didn't mean to do that," As we look toward the future, with hypersonic missiles and AI-controlled systems, one has to wonder, what is the next? Oops, waiting for us? Because if history has taught us anything, it's that we are really good at making mistakes. We just keep getting better at making them permanent. Honestly, after hearing about a 3-pound wrench almost ending Arkansas, it makes you wonder how we've made it this far as a species. If you were that technician in the missile silo, would you have owned up to the mistake, or would you have just started walking toward the horizon and never looked back? Drop a comment below and let me know which of these historical oops moments was the most terrifying to you. Also, if you want to make sure you don't miss our next deep dive into the chaotic side of history, make sure to subscribe.